Elena woke to the smell of antiseptic and the low hum of fluorescent lights. Her first thought was of Sophie, a burst of panic slicing through the fog in her mind. She tried to sit up, but the world tilted, and a hand gently steadied her shoulder. "Easy," a calm voice said. "You've been out for a while." She turned her head and froze. The man sitting beside her was a stranger, well-dressed, tall, his posture too composed for this sterile place. His suit jacket hung neatly over the back of the chair, and his wristwatch gleamed faintly under the hospital lights. "Where's my daughter?" she demanded, her voice hoarse. "She's fine," he said immediately. "She's with a nurse down the hall, eating ice cream. Chocolate, I think." Elena sagged back against the pillow, relief washing through her. "Thank God!" Her gaze darted to him again. "Who are you?" "Damien Ward," he replied quietly. "Sophie called me." She blinked, confused. "What?" "She was trying to call for help," he explained, "but she must have dialed a wrong number. My number." For a moment, Elena could only stare. "You came?" He nodded once. "She said her mother wasn't breathing. I traced the address and drove over. The ambulance was taking too long." Elena's throat tightened. "You didn't have to." "I did," he said simply. The certainty in his tone silenced her. No one had spoken to her like that in a long time, with conviction, not pity. She studied him again, the sharp lines of his face softened by exhaustion. "You carried me here?" He nodded. "You fainted, probably from exhaustion or low blood sugar. The doctors said you'll be fine." Elena closed her eyes briefly, mortified. "You shouldn't have gone to all that trouble." Damien gave a faint, humorless smile. "Trouble's relative." 2 hours later, Sophie burst into the room like sunlight, her curls bouncing and her hands sticky with melted ice cream. "Mommy!" she cried, climbing onto the bed. Elena hugged her tightly, her eyes burning. "Sweetheart, are you okay? You scared me so much." "You scared me," Sophie retorted, pouting. "You fell down, and I called Uncle Mateo, but I got Mr. Damien instead. He came really fast." Elena looked at Damien, her lips twitching despite herself. "I guess we owe Mr. Damien a thank you." Sophie nodded solemnly. "I already said thank you, and I told him he has a superhero car." Damien chuckled softly. "It's just an SUV." "It's black and shiny," Sophie said proudly, "like Batman's." Elena laughed weakly. "Well, Mr. Ward, seems you've made an impression." He shrugged, amused. "I've been called worse." After the discharge paperwork was signed, Damien offered to drive them home. Elena protested, insisting she could manage, but one look at Sophie yawning in her arms changed her mind. The drive was quiet at first. The city outside the windows blurred into gold and gray as evening fell. Sophie dozed in the back seat, hugging her stuffed rabbit. "You live out this way?" Damien asked, glancing at the narrow streets ahead. "Yeah," Elena said softly. "A few blocks past the old pharmacy." He nodded. "It's a quiet neighborhood." "Mostly," she said, "except when the landlord's fixing pipes at midnight." He smiled faintly. "Sounds charming." Elena hesitated, then asked, "Why did you come, really? You could have just hung up." He kept his eyes on the road. "I've gotten a lot of wrong calls before," he said. "Spam, misdials, but this one didn't sound like noise." She sounded terrified. "She must have," Elena murmured. "She's all I have." Something flickered across Damien's expression, something she couldn't quite name. "She's lucky to have you." Elena looked down at her hands. "We manage." He didn't press, but she felt his gaze flicker toward her, reading more than she said. When they reached her apartment, she tried to insist again that he didn't need to come up, but Damien followed her to the door anyway, carrying Sophie while she fumbled for keys. Inside, the small apartment was neat but tired. Peeling paint, a flickering lamp, a vase of fake flowers by the window. Damien set Sophie gently on the couch. "You should get some rest." Elena nodded. "I will. Thank you again, for everything." He hesitated, then handed her a business card. "If you start feeling faint again, or need anything, call me." She frowned. "I can't pay you back." "I didn't ask for that," he said, his voice quiet but firm. She studied him, searching for the catch. There was always a catch, but his expression held only sincerity, maybe even loneliness. Finally, she nodded. "Good night, Mr. Ward." He inclined his head. "Good night, Miss Ruiz." As he turned to leave, Sophie stirred on the couch. "Mr. Damien?" she mumbled sleepily. "Are you going to visit us again?" He froze, caught off guard. Then he smiled. "Maybe I will." Elena watched him go, the door clicking softly behind him. The apartment felt smaller once he was gone. Quieter, too. She looked down at the card in her hand, tracing the embossed letters with her thumb. Damien Ward, Ward Capital. She didn't know it yet, but the wrong number her daughter dialed had connected her life to his in a way neither of them could undo. Outside, the sound of the black SUV faded into the distance. Inside, Elena gathered her daughter into her arms and whispered, "Thank you, sweetheart." Sophie stirred, half asleep. "For what?" "For calling the wrong number," Elena murmured, smiling faintly into the dark. Elena hadn't expected to see Damien again, but 3 days later there was a soft knock at her door. Polite, tentative, and when she opened it, there he was, standing in the hallway with a paper bag in one hand and the same composed calm in his eyes. "I brought groceries," he said simply. "You didn't have much in the fridge last time." She blinked, speechless. How did you?" "I saw it when I carried Sophie to bed," he said, stepping awkwardly into the doorway. "There was milk, but it expired 2 weeks ago, and the bread well, it fought back." Despite herself, Elena laughed. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said, smiling faintly, "but I wanted to." Sophie appeared behind her, hair wild from sleep. "Mr. Damien," she squealed, "you came back." He knelt to her level. "I did, but only if you promise to share your cereal this time." Sophie giggled. "Deal." By the time Elena finished insisting she could manage just fine, Damien was already unloading the groceries onto her small kitchen counter. He moved with quiet efficiency, unpacking rice, fresh vegetables, even coffee. "You bought too much," she protested. "You can freeze most of it," he said. "And Sophie told me you like coffee." Elena turned to her daughter, who looked smugly unrepentant. "You've been chatting with billionaires now?" Sophie shrugged. "He's nice." Damien hid a grin as he reached for a saucepan. "You mentioned you hadn't eaten since the hospital. I thought I'd cook something." "You cook?" Elena asked, skeptical. He gave her a look that was both self-deprecating and proud. "When I remember not to burn the onions." Against her better judgment, she let him. Soon the kitchen filled with the rich scent of garlic and olive oil. It felt strange, intimate almost, watching a man in a tailored shirt standing in her modest apartment, sleeves rolled up, stirring soup like he belonged there. Sophie perched at the table, drawing with crayons. "Can you stay for dinner?" Damien glanced at Elena. "If your mom doesn't mind." She hesitated. She should say no. She barely knew this man. He was kind, yes, but people with power always had motives. Still, when she saw Sophie's hopeful face, something softened. "Fine," she said, "but I'm doing the dishes." Over dinner, the conversation flowed more easily than she expected. Damien told her about growing up in Boston, about his mother's insistence that he learn piano before calculus. Elena shared stories from her nursing days, careful to skim over the parts that hurt too much. When Sophie ran off to show Damien her drawings, he looked genuinely captivated, crouched on the floor beside her, listening as she explained her latest masterpiece. A crooked stick figure family with a tall man driving a black car. "That's you," Sophie said proudly, pointing. "You came to save Mommy." Damien smiled faintly, a flicker of something unspoken in his eyes. "I think she saved herself." Elena felt her throat tighten. She busied herself clearing plates, pretending not to hear. When Sophie was finally asleep, the apartment dim and quiet, Damien lingered by the window. The city lights glowed faintly beyond the curtains. "You don't owe me anything, you know," Elena said quietly, standing behind him. He turned. "I don't think this is about owing." "Then what is it about?" He hesitated, then said, "I've spent most of my life building things. Companies, systems, partnerships, but none of it feels like it matters anymore. That night your daughter called. I don't know, it felt like a reason to stop running." Elena crossed her arms, studying him. "Running from what?" He gave a small, rueful smile. Myself, mostly. She wasn't sure what to say. There was pain behind his composure, a quiet kind of guilt she recognized. She'd seen it in hospital hallways, in grieving families, people who wanted to fix something too late. After a moment, she asked, "Why me?" He blinked. "What do you mean? You could have sent help, called someone else. Never looked back. Instead, you keep showing up. Why?" His answer was soft but sure. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about how scared Sophie sounded, about how alone she must have felt, and how no one should feel like that." Elena's chest tightened. "You think money can fix that?" "No," he said quietly, "but maybe being here can." For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. Finally, she said, "You're strange, Mr. Ward." He smiled. "I get that a lot." The next morning, she found a note on the counter beside a new box of cereal and a carton of fresh milk. "For breakfast. Try not to skip it this time." DW Elena rolled her eyes but couldn't help smiling. Sophie peeked around the corner, still in pajamas. "Did he leave us another surprise?" Elena nodded. "Looks like it." Sophie grinned. "He's nice. Can we keep him?" Elena laughed, scooping her daughter into her arms. "He's not a puppy, sweetheart." "But he could be our friend," Sophie said sleepily. Elena brushed a curl from her daughter's forehead, her heart softening despite every warning in her head. "Maybe," she murmured, "maybe he could." Outside, the morning sun streamed through the thin curtains, catching the edges of the note on the counter. A quiet promise written in neat, deliberate handwriting. The week passed quietly. Too quietly for someone like Damian Ward. For years, his days had been filled with board meetings, legal calls, and people who never said no. But lately, his calendar was blank by choice. He told his assistant he was on sabbatical, though the truth was simpler. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what came next. He found himself driving through Elena's neighborhood more than once. It wasn't intentional, or so he told himself. Each time he'd catch sight of the narrow street, the chipped brick stoop, the second-floor window where a child's paper stars hung. Sometimes he'd keep driving. Other times he'd stop. This time he stopped. When Elena opened the door, she looked surprised but not startled. Sophie's laughter echoed faintly from inside. "You again," she said, one eyebrow lifting. "Me again," he said, holding up a takeout bag. "Before you accuse me of overstepping, I come bearing food. No ulterior motives." She crossed her arms. "You don't do anything without a reason, Mr. Ward." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm learning." They ate on the balcony, the late afternoon air warm with the smell of street vendors and blooming jasmine. Sophie sat cross-legged on the floor, swinging her feet and humming to herself while drawing on a napkin. Elena glanced at him between bites. "So what do you do when you're not rescuing strangers and buying groceries?" "I run a few companies," he said simply. "Technology, healthcare investments, things like that." She tilted her head. "You mean you're one of those billionaires who think they can fix the world with a checkbook?" He laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. "Something like that. Though lately I'm realizing checks don't fix much." Her tone softened. "That's a rare admission for someone in your shoes." He studied her. "And you? What did you do before everything fell apart?" She finished for him, her voice dry. He nodded. "I was a nurse," and she said, "oncology unit at St. Maron Hospital. Long hours, bad coffee, too many patients, and not enough beds." He frowned. "That's a good hospital. Reputable." She let out a humorless laugh. "Reputable on paper, maybe. The reality's messier." He leaned forward slightly. "What happened?" Elena hesitated, her eyes fixed on the distant skyline. "A patient died. A child. A boy named Connor. The monitor malfunctioned, and the alarm never sounded. By the time we noticed, it was too late." Damian's chest tightened. "That's awful. But not your fault." She shook her head. "I thought so too. I filed an incident report, but a week later I was written up for negligence and told to take a leave of absence. A month after that, I was terminated." He frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "It didn't to me either," she said quietly, "until I found out the hospital had buried several similar cases. The monitors were defective. They knew, and they covered it up to avoid liability." Damian stared at her, stunned. You had proof? She nodded slowly. I kept copies of everything. Emails, patient logs, equipment tags. I thought about going to the press, but I have a daughter. I couldn't risk losing what little we had left. Silence settled between them, heavy but not awkward. Finally, Damien said, You were right to report it. You were doing your job. Her eyes flicked up to his. Tell that to the board of directors who made me the scapegoat. He sat back, mind spinning. The name St. Maron Hospital tugged at something familiar. Wait, St. Maron receives funding from the Lucent Core Foundation. She nodded. I know, one of their charitable partnerships. His stomach dropped. Lucent Core wasn't just any foundation. It was one of his. Ward Capital owned a controlling interest in the company that managed its funds. Damien forced his expression to remain calm. What if someone looked into it again? Someone with more leverage than a nurse? Elena gave a tired smile. Unless you can resurrect a dead boy and unbury corporate greed, there's no point. He didn't respond, but deep down, the idea had already taken root. Later after dinner, Sophie fell asleep on the couch again, her crayons scattered like tiny flags of color. Damien helped Elena gather them. Their hands brushed once, a fleeting electric touch, and neither spoke. She likes you, Elena said softly. He smiled. I like her too. She hasn't opened up to anyone since her father left, she added, her voice low. That caught him off guard. I didn't realize. It was years ago, she said quickly. He didn't want to be a dad. He hesitated. And you? She looked up, meeting his gaze. I didn't have a choice. You make do with what's left. Damien studied her, the quiet resilience in her eyes, the way exhaustion had sculpted grace rather than bitterness. You shouldn't have had to do it alone. Elena gave a small, wistful smile. Most people don't have a choice in that either. When he left, the night air felt colder than it should have. He got into his car but didn't start it right away. Instead, he opened his phone and scrolled through his company's private network. Lucent Core Foundation, Director of Finance, Andrew Kalin. The name hit him like a stone. Kalin, his former CFO, the man who'd resigned under mysterious circumstances 2 years ago. The same man who had spearheaded multiple cost efficiency programs across their medical subsidiaries. Damien's pulse quickened. What the hell did you do, Kalin? He muttered. He looked back up at Elena's window. The light inside flickered off. A wrong number had brought him to her door. But now that call was becoming something else. A signal. And Damien Ward had never ignored a signal in his life. Damien didn't sleep that night. He sat in the soft blue glow of his study, his laptop open, files spread across the desk like puzzle pieces. The hum of the city below seemed distant, muted beneath the weight of what he was uncovering. Every click pulled him deeper into the past. Financial ledgers, internal memos, hospital expense reports. Lucent Core's records were pristine on the surface, but Damien had built too many companies not to recognize the faint fingerprints of fraud. Come on, he muttered, scrolling faster. Where are you hiding it? Then he found it, a line item buried in a quarterly donation summary. Equipment Recalibration Initiative, St. Maron Hospital. It had been filed under his own signature, dated 18 months ago, but he hadn't signed that document. Someone had used his name. His chest tightened. He pulled up the digital log. The authorizing account wasn't his. It was A. Kalin. Andrew Kalin. He sat back, a cold, sick fury creeping in. You bastard! By dawn, Damien was at his office, a sleek tower of glass that suddenly felt like a monument to something rotten. Jonas, his head of security and one of the few people he trusted, met him with 2 coffees and a wary look. You called at 3 a.m, Jonas said, setting the cup down. That's never good news. I need you to dig, Damien said without preamble. Lucent Core's donation programs, particularly anything tied to St. Marin. Track transactions, offshore transfers, third-party vendors, everything. Jonas frowned. That's a lot of digging. You think Kalin's involved? I know he is, Damien said, sliding the forged document across the desk. He used my signature. And if I'm right, the money meant to fix those faulty monitors was rerouted somewhere else. Jonas skimmed the file, his expression darkening. That's not just fraud, that's criminal negligence. If patients died, they did, Damien interrupted quietly. A boy named Connor. Elena told me his story. She was fired for reporting it. Jonas looked up sharply. The nurse? Yeah. Jonas let out a low whistle. You've gotten personal on this one. Damien shot him a look. This isn't about me? Jonas smirked faintly. Of course not. The billionaire who never visits hospitals just happens to risk his reputation for one nurse and a little girl who dialed the wrong number. Damien's glare was sharp, but his voice softened. If you'd seen the way Sophie looked at her mother that night, you wouldn't be joking. That shut Jonas up. He nodded once. I'll get started. Later that day, Damien drove back to Elena's apartment. The sky was overcast and the streets shimmered with the remnants of last night's rain. When Elena opened the door, she looked surprised to see him again, and a little uneasy. You look like you haven't slept, she said. I haven't, he admitted. We need to talk. Her brows knit together. About what? St. Maron, he said. The color drained from her face. I told you, that's over. No, he said firmly, stepping inside. It's not. I found evidence that Lucent Corps, one of the hospital's funders, rerouted repair funds. The monitors were never fixed because the money was stolen. Elena stared at him, disbelief and anger flickering across her features. Stolen? From a hospital? Yes, by Andrew Kalin. He used my name to authorize the transactions. She sank into a chair, her hands trembling. You mean those children died because someone wanted to make money? Yes, Damien said, and because no one stopped him. Her voice cracked. I tried. I filed reports, begged for audits, but they told me I was crazy, that I was jeopardizing my career. Damien crouched beside her. You weren't crazy. You were right. Her eyes filled with tears. And now what? You can't fight people like that, Damien. They're protected. They have lawyers, boards, the system itself. He met her gaze. Then I'll fight them my way. By evening, they were both at Damien's office. Elena sat quietly while Jonas explained the findings he'd compiled. Bank statements, off-book accounts, a paper trail leading to a consulting firm in Zurich. The money was funneled through shell companies, Jonas said. Millions in donations meant for hospital repairs. Kalin's name pops up everywhere. Elena pressed a hand to her mouth. God. Damien straightened. We take it to the board. Publicly. Jonas shook his head. If you do that without airtight proof, Kalin will spin it. He'll say you're framing him to cover your own negligence. You'll go down with him. Damien's jaw tightened. Then we get proof. Elena looked between them, her voice small. How? Jonas hesitated. Kalin was careful. Everything's encrypted behind a firewall. One only he and his old team can access. Damien's expression hardened. Then I'll call in a favor. That night after Jonas left, Damien and Elena stood by the window overlooking the city. Rain began to fall again, soft and rhythmic. You don't have to do this, she said quietly. This could ruin you. He looked at her, his voice low but steady. If I walk away, it'll ruin me more. She met his eyes. Why are you doing this for me? For you. He smiled faintly. No. For the boy you couldn't save. For the system that broke you. For every person who trusted me to build something good and got betrayal instead. Elena swallowed hard. You really believe you can fix it? No, he said softly, but I can expose it. The rain drummed harder against the glass, and in its reflection, Elena saw something she hadn't in years. Not wealth, not power, but conviction. The kind of conviction that could shake walls. Hours later when she left, Damien stayed behind, the office dim except for the glow of his laptop. He opened a new message, fingers hovering over the keys. To andrew.kalin@lucentcorps.com. Subject, we need to talk. He hesitated, then added, you used my name to bury the truth. I'm digging it up. He hit send and leaned back, the faintest glimmer of satisfaction in his chest. For the first time in years, Damien Ward wasn't running from the past. He was walking straight toward it. The next morning, the storm had passed, but the air in Damien's office felt charged. He stared at his phone screen. Kalen hadn't replied to the email, not even a read receipt. That silence, more than any angry response, confirmed what Damien already knew. He'd struck a nerve. Jonas arrived early, sleeves rolled up, a folder tucked under his arm. "We've got a problem," he said flatly. "Kalen knows." Damien looked up sharply. "How?" "Someone accessed your email server at 3:47 a.m., Jonas said, dropping the folder onto the desk. "Internal trace. He's covering tracks already, probably prepping a defense." Damien clenched his jaw. "Then we move faster." Elena was waiting in the lobby when Damien arrived at St. Marin. Her posture was rigid, her expression wary. She'd agreed reluctantly to come with him for what he called a meeting of clarity. "Tell me again why I'm here," she murmured as they rode the elevator up. "Because they made you the scapegoat," Damien said quietly. "You deserve to hear what they say when they realize the person they buried isn't staying buried." Elena crossed her arms. "You think they'll just confess in front of you?" He smiled grimly. "No, but they'll tell me exactly where to look." When the elevator doors opened, the boardroom was already half full. Men and women in crisp suits turned as Damien walked in, his reputation preceding him. Andrew Kalen stood at the far end of the table, calm, silver-haired, and smiling like a man who believed he was untouchable. "Mr. Ward," Kalen said smoothly, "to what do we owe this unexpected visit?" Damien didn't bother with pleasantries. "We need to discuss your St. Marin allocation reports." A flicker of tension crossed Kalen's face before he masked it with a laugh. "Really? I thought you'd retired from micromanaging donations." Damien dropped a folder onto the table. "This isn't micromanaging. This is theft. You forged my signature, rerouted recall funds, and covered up equipment defects that killed patients." The room went still. Kalen's smile didn't fade, but his tone sharpened. "That's an outrageous accusation." "Outrageous, but true," Damien said. "I've got the digital trails, transfers, emails, approvals, and if I'm not mistaken, at least one internal memo bearing your initials on the falsified recalibration project." One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. Another cleared his throat. Kalen turned cold eyes on Damien. "You think this scare tactic will work? You don't have proof, just speculation, and dragging in some ex-nurse won't make your case credible." At that, Elena's hands tightened into fists. She stepped forward before Damien could stop her. "You destroyed my career," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "You used my name, my reports, to hide your mistakes. A child died, and you buried the evidence like he was just a number." The boardroom went silent. Kalen's expression flickered. For half a heartbeat, guilt, then irritation. "You should have stayed quiet, Miss Ruiz. You were paid a settlement for a reason." Damien froze. "What settlement?" Elena's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" Kalen realized his mistake instantly but said nothing. Damien leaned in, his voice low. "You forged my name, framed her, and then used company funds to pay her off so she wouldn't talk. You really thought no one would trace that?" Kalen's mask cracked. "You can't prove it." Jonas, who had been silently standing near the door, spoke up. "Actually, we can." He set a small recorder on the table. "This room's been under surveillance for the last 10 minutes. Everything you just said, on file." The color drained from Kalen's face. Security escorted Kalen out an hour later, but the boardroom was still buzzing. Damien stayed behind, his hands braced on the edge of the table. Elena stood near the window, watching the city blur below. "You didn't tell me there was a settlement," he said quietly. "I didn't know," she whispered. "They said the hospital was offering severance after my termination. I used it to keep Sophie fed. I thought it was just policy." He sighed. "They bought your silence." She turned to him, her eyes burning. "And now? Now we burn back." That evening the story began to leak. First through whispers, then through headlines. Lucent Core CFO suspended pending fraud investigation. Donor misappropriation linked to hospital fatalities. Damien didn't release a public statement, but the press didn't need one. His silence said enough. At his penthouse, he sat with Elena and Sophie, the TV muted. The little girl was curled up on the couch, drawing another picture. This one of a tall man, a woman, and a small house with a sun above it. "Who's that?" Damien asked softly. You and Mommy, Sophie said, beaming. And me. We're all happy now. Elena looked down, smiling faintly. You've made quite an impression, Damien chuckled. She's going to be running PR campaigns before she turns 10. But when his gaze drifted back to the city skyline, his expression hardened. The battle wasn't over. Kalen still had allies. Lawyers, executives, politicians. A single hearing wouldn't dismantle years of corruption. Elena followed his gaze. You're thinking about what comes next. I always am, he admitted. The system doesn't break from one man falling. It breaks when people stop protecting it. She nodded. Then maybe it's time someone built something better. He turned to her, meeting her eyes. You sound like someone who's not done fighting. Her lips curved. Maybe I'm not. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, rolling over the skyline. But for once, it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a beginning. The next morning, Damien's phone exploded with calls. Board members, lawyers, journalists, all demanding explanations, statements, denials. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, flustered. Mr. Ward, CNBC wants a live interview. The Financial Review, too. And the Lucent Core board. Cancel them all, Damien said, cutting her off. No comments, not yet. He hung up, rubbing his temples. His reflection stared back from the window. Sleepless, unshaven, eyes that had seen too much corruption in too short a time. But beneath the fatigue was something else. Resolve. Elena arrived soon after, holding 2 coffees. She set one beside him without a word. They're tearing you apart on the news, she said quietly. Half of them think you orchestrated the cover-up. The other half think you're trying to look like a hero. Damien smirked faintly. Then I must be doing something right, she frowned. You're risking everything. If this goes wrong, he met her gaze. It already went wrong the day Kalen signed my name. Jonas stepped in, tablet in hand. We've got movement, he said. Kalen's hired a crisis PR firm and filed an injunction to seal all Lucent Core financial records pending review. He's playing the long game. Stall, discredit, outlast. Damien exhaled slowly. Then we move faster. What about the Zurich accounts? Still locked behind encryption, Jonas replied. We'll need access codes or a whistleblower who was part of the setup. Elena's brow furrowed. What about that lawyer who handled the so-called settlement? If Kalen used company money, someone processed those transfers. Jonas raised an eyebrow. You're thinking like a shark, Ms. Ruiz. She folded her arms. I worked in oncology. You learn to spot what's killing the patient. That afternoon, they drove across town to meet Lydia Tran, a corporate compliance attorney who'd quietly resigned from Lucent Core 6 months earlier. Her office was modest, tucked inside an aging building lined with ivy and rusted window bars. When Lydia saw them, her expression tightened. If this is about Lucent Core, I can't help you. I signed an NDA. Damien placed a folder on her desk. You signed that before they committed criminal fraud? NDAs don't protect felonies. Her fingers hesitated over the folder. You're accusing Kalen directly? I'm not accusing, Damien said. I'm proving. Lydia opened the folder. Inside were copies of bank statements, emails, and audit trails Jonas had traced back to her office's digital signature. Her face paled. I didn't know, she whispered. They said it was a reallocation for a medical device recall. The forms were pre-approved. I just processed them. Elena leaned forward. You can clear your name and save others. There are families who deserve the truth. Lydia hesitated, then nodded slowly. If I testify, I'll lose everything. But if I stay silent, she closed the folder, resolve hardening in her eyes. I'll send you what you need. By nightfall, Jonas had the files, encrypted correspondence between Kalen and offshore intermediaries, wire transfers routed through shell accounts labeled community outreach programs, the smoking gun. But as Damien scrolled through the files, his phone buzzed with a private message from an unknown number. Unknown. You think you're saving her. You're not. Walk away, Damien. A friend. He stared at the message, pulse quickening. Jonas noticed. What is it? Nothing, Damien said, slipping the phone into his pocket. But inside, dread began to coil. The next morning, a news alert hit every major network. Lucent Core data breach. Confidential files leaked. The leak included only partial information, enough to make Damien look complicit. His name appeared on multiple false invoices. Someone flipped the narrative, Jonas said grimly, pacing the office. They're making it look like you and Kalen worked together. Elna stood beside the window, fists clenched. They're framing you. I know, Damien said, which means they're scared. She turned to him. So what do we do? He straightened, his expression hardening. We go public, not through the press, through the families, the people who lost someone at St. Marin. Elena blinked. You mean? I mean we show them what Lucent Core did. Faces, names, stories, the kind Kalen can't bury under paperwork. Jonas looked doubtful. You'll be crucified before they listen. Damien gave a wry smile. Then I'll burn publicly if that's what it takes. But I'm not letting them rewrite the truth. That evening, they met in Elena's small apartment. Sophie was asleep in her room, the faint glow of her nightlight spilling into the hallway. The living room was dim, lit only by the flicker of Damien's laptop. On the screen were video testimonies, former nurses, technicians, grieving parents, people who'd been silenced by settlements and threats. One woman, her face streaked with tears, said, "They told us the alarm malfunctioned. They said it was no one's fault, but my son's chart shows they knew." Elena covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Damien reached out, resting a steadying hand on hers. "They'll listen now," he said quietly. She looked at him through tears. "And if they don't, then we make them." He glanced at the final clip, an anonymous whistleblower's message, voice distorted, but words razor sharp. Lucent Core isn't just a charity front. It's a machine that feeds on guilt and profit. You stop one, 3 more take its place. Damien closed the laptop. Then we go for the head. Elena frowned. You mean Kalen? He shook his head slowly. No, the board that enabled him, the investors who kept him untouchable, the entire structure. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Elena said softly, "You can't fight an empire alone." He met her gaze. "I'm not alone anymore." Outside, rain began to fall again. Soft at first, then steady, rhythmic. Inside, the war had shifted. The story was no longer about one billionaire's guilt or one nurse's pain. It was about everyone who'd ever been silenced, and those who refused to be. The next 48 hours were a blur of noise, headlines, and tightening pressure. What had begun as a quiet investigation had become a full-scale war of narratives. Reporters camped outside Damien's building. Investors called in panic. Lucent Core's shares had dropped 11% overnight, and the board was demanding his head on a pike. But Damien had one advantage: the truth, and Lydia's encrypted archive. He sat in his office, the blinds drawn, the hum of servers filling the silence. Jonas stood over his shoulder while Elena, anxious but steady, watched from across the desk. On the screen glowed the decrypted files Lydia had sent at dawn. "Here," Jonas said, tapping a folder labeled Shadow Projects. "Transfers to front companies in the Caymans. And these," he clicked again, "match the donation cycles from St. Marin. Every single one." Damien scrolled through line after line of evidence. Signatures, audit trails, internal chats where executives joked about out of sight, out of liability. His chest tightened. "They knew everything," he whispered. Elena's voice trembled. "How many patients?" "Dozens," Jonas replied quietly. "Maybe more." Damien leaned back, eyes closed. "We release it. All of it." Jonas hesitated. "That's scorched earth. You'll implicate half the board, and yourself, technically, since the approvals used your credentials." Damien opened his eyes. "Then I burn with them." By mid-afternoon, Damien stood in front of the cameras for the first time in months. The press conference was hastily assembled in the lobby of Ward Tower. Flashes burst like lightning, microphones thrust forward like spears. He didn't use a teleprompter. His voice was even, deliberate. "Lucent Core was created to fund compassion," he said. "Instead, it financed silence. I was deceived, but I also failed to see what was in front of me. Families lost their children because we put profit above people. That ends today." He handed the flash drive of documents to the reporter from the Chronicle, the only outlet that hadn't sensationalized the story for ratings. "Everything you need is there. No conditions. Publish it all." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Questions erupted, but Damien simply turned and walked away. Outside, the sky hung gray and heavy, mirroring the weight on his shoulders. Elena was waiting by the curb. "You just detonated a bomb," she murmured. "I know," he said. "Let's hope it hits the right targets." That night, the fallout began. News outlets ran headlines like wildfire. Corporate empire collapses under fraud scandal. Billionaire exposes own foundation. Public outrage surged. Protests formed outside Lucentcor's headquarters. Jonas kept updates streaming in. "Kalen's on the run," he said over speakerphone. "Interpol just flagged his passport in Zurich. The DOJ is opening a criminal inquiry." Damien didn't answer. He was staring at a single line from one of Kalen's leaked emails. "Ward thinks he's saving lives. He's saving face." He closed the laptop. "He's not done," he muttered. Elena frowned. "You think he'll try something?" "Kalen doesn't lose gracefully." He was right. The next morning, Damien's car alarm blared in the underground garage. Its windshield shattered. The word traitor scrawled across the hood in red paint. Jonas's security team swept the building within minutes. "Looks like a message," Jonas said grimly. Damien forced a smile. "Then it's working." But that night, a courier delivered an envelope addressed to Elena Ruiz. Inside was a single photo, Sophie walking home from school, and a note, "Tell your billionaire to stop digging." Elena's hand shook as she passed it to Damien. His jaw locked. "This just got personal," Jonas growled. Damien's voice was ice. "Get Sophie out of the city. Tonight," Elena protested. "We can't just run." "Yes, we can," he snapped, then softened. "Please, let me handle this." She nodded reluctantly, fear flickering beneath her calm. The following day, Damien confronted Kalen's attorney at a private club downtown. The man, slick and confident, tried to play diplomat. "Kalen's prepared to settle privately," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "You retract your statements, the media quiets down, and everyone walks away clean. You'll even get your company back." Damien didn't open it. "And the dead children, do they walk away too?" The lawyer's smile faltered. "Be reasonable. You're losing millions." Damien rose. "Keep your blood money. Tell Kalen this isn't negotiation. It's judgment." He walked out before the man could reply. That evening, as thunder rolled across the skyline, Damien drove aimlessly through the rain-slicked streets. His phone buzzed with another unknown message. "You've chosen the hard way. See you soon." Lightning flashed. He tightened his grip on the wheel. Somewhere behind him, a black SUV merged into traffic. Headlights dimmed. He didn't notice. Back at Elena's temporary hotel, Sophie slept peacefully for the first time in days. Elena stood by the window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of gold. When her phone buzzed, she expected it to be Damien. Instead, it was a video message. Grainy, distorted audio. A man's voice said, "He's not who you think he is." Then the screen cut to an image, Damien, shaking hands with a hospital executive years ago. The caption beneath reading, "Lucentcor's founding architect of reform." Elena's heart sank. "No, that can't be." The file ended with another line of text. "Truth is relative. Whose story will you believe?" Rain battered the window, matching the chaos beginning to rise again outside. The war for the truth wasn't over. It was only deepening. The morning broke gray and tense. Damien woke to the sharp buzz of his phone. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of notifications. Lucentcor Lies was trending globally. His face, grainy and framed by scandal, was plastered across every newsfeed. He sat up, the sheets cold, his mind replaying the last message Elena had received. "He's not who you think he is." The image of him shaking hands years ago now twisted into propaganda, proof that he'd built the very empire he was destroying. He knew who was behind it. Andrew Kalen wasn't hiding anymore. He was retaliating. Jonas burst into the apartment minutes later, laptop in hand. "They just aired an interview," he said. "Kalen's on international television claiming you orchestrated everything. Says you framed him to dodge liability." Damien stood in silence, jaw tight. "He's desperate," Jonas scrolled. "He's got proof, Damien. Emails, fake, but convincing. They look like they came from your account." Damien exhaled through his nose. He's setting up a false trail. I need to talk to Lydia. If those encrypted files were accessed, he might have backdoored them before she sent them. Jonas nodded grimly. I'll find her. But there's something else. You're being subpoenaed. Federal investigation opens tomorrow. The words landed like a punch. They think I'm the villain now. Jonas's voice softened. Right now, you are. Unless we can flip the narrative again. Across town, Elena watched the same broadcast on a flickering television in the safe house. The commentator's voice was merciless. Damien Ward, self-proclaimed whistleblower or mastermind of the Lucent Core scandal. Her stomach turned. The image on screen showed him shaking hands with executives, smiling. Then another clip, Lucent Core's charity gala years ago. Damien giving a speech about ethical leadership. Sophie wandered into the room, rubbing her eyes. Mommy, why are they saying bad things about him? Elena knelt, pulling the little girl close. Sometimes, sweetheart, people lie when they're scared. Is he scared too? Elena hesitated. Maybe, but he's brave. She glanced at her phone, debating whether to call him. But then another message appeared. Unknown sender. You think he saved you? He saved himself. Ask him why Connor's case never made it to court. Her pulse quickened. Connor, the boy who died. She stared at the screen. Could it be true? Could Damien have been involved before the scandal broke? That night, Damien met Lydia in an abandoned office building downtown. Rain streamed down the windows, neon lights smearing across the wet pavement below. Lydia's face was pale. You were right, she said. He accessed the archive remotely before I sent it. Some files were altered. What kind of alterations? Metadata edits, message insertions. Enough to make it look like you were part of the original fraud network. Damien clenched his fists. Can you reverse it? She shook her head. Not cleanly. If I tamper again, it'll look like you really are covering your tracks. He paced, his reflection fractured in the rain-streaked glass. So we're stuck. Lydia hesitated. Not exactly. There is a backup server, Lucent Core's shadow archive. Only Kalen and the board chair had access. Damien turned sharply. The board chair? Lydia nodded. Eleanor Shaw. She runs their investment arm. If we can get her access key, we can prove everything. He ran a hand through his hair. And where is she now? Lydia's voice dropped. Zurich, same place Kalen ran to. By morning, Damien was on a private flight with Jonas. Exhaustion etched into his face. The city lights vanished beneath them, replaced by clouds that looked like bruises against the sky. You sure about this? Jonas asked. Interpol's already watching the airports. If Kalen knows you're coming, he'll know, Damien said. And that's the point. Jonas frowned. You're bait. Exactly. Meanwhile, back in the safe house, Elena's phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Damien. She answered instantly. Elena, listen to me, he said, his voice ragged through static. Whatever you're seeing on TV, it's lies. Kalen's rewriting everything. Then tell me, she said softly. Tell me about Connor. Why didn't you stop it back then? He froze. What? The message said you knew, she whispered, that Lucent Core was already under investigation when Connor died. That you… Elena, no, he interrupted, panic in his tone. I didn't know. But before he could finish, the line went dead. She tried calling back, but the signal was gone. Outside, thunder rolled again. In Zurich, Damien and Jonas stepped out into the rain-soaked night. The city glimmered under the glow of passing trams. Damien's phone buzzed. A new message. Welcome to the end game. A GPS pin followed. Jonas checked his gun discreetly. It's a trap. Damien nodded. That's why we're going. They followed the coordinates to an empty glass tower near the river. Inside, the lobby lights flickered on automatically. At the far end stood Andrew Kalen, calm, collected, a smile cutting across his face. I was wondering when the hero would arrive, Kalen said. Damien stepped forward. This ends tonight. Kalen chuckled. Oh, it ends all right, but not for me. Behind him, a security feed flickered to life on the wall. Elena and Sophie, live video, surrounded by two men in dark coats. Damien's breath caught. Kalen's smile widened. You want the truth? You'll trade it for them. Jonas tensed, ready to move. But Damien lifted a hand. His eyes stayed on the screen, heart pounding like thunder outside. For the first time in years, Damien Ward, the man who controlled everything, was utterly powerless. The storm outside Zurich had turned the river into a sheet of trembling glass. Lightning flashed across the skyline as Damien stepped closer to Kalen, every instinct in him torn between fury and restraint. "Let them go," he said, his voice low, steady. Kalen tilted his head, smiling faintly. "And miss the look on your face? Damien Ward, the man who could buy and sell nations, finally begging." Jonas's hand hovered near his concealed weapon, eyes darting between them. "Where are they, Kalen?" "Oh, safe enough," Kalen replied, glancing at the feet on the wall. "For now, depends on how you play." Damien's pulse thundered. "You don't want money. You want legacy. You want to drag me down with you." Kalen's smirk hardened. "Legacy? No, I want justice. For years I made you richer while you played saint. You funded the hospitals that killed those kids, Damien. Don't pretend this is all me." Damien's jaw tightened. "I didn't know." "You didn't ask to know," Kalen shot back. "You signed checks, turned away, and called it generosity. I just did what your silence allowed." For a moment, neither spoke. The air hummed with the sound of rain on glass. Then Damien said quietly, "Maybe you're right." Kalen blinked. "What?" "I let the system use me," Damien continued. "But you—" He took a step forward. "You became it." Kalen's eyes narrowed. "Don't moralize, Damien. You're not the hero here." "No," Damien said. "But I can make sure you're remembered as the villain." He gave the faintest nod. Jonas moved. In one fluid motion, Jonas drew and fired. Not at Kalen, but at the security camera. The feed sparked and went black. Kalen flinched, then snarled. "You idiot! Now you'll never find them." "Already did," Jonas said, revealing his earpiece. "That feed wasn't live. My team traced the signal 10 minutes ago." Kalen's expression shattered. Halfway across Zurich, a tactical van screeched to a stop outside an abandoned warehouse. Inside, two men guarding Elena and Sophie were caught off guard by floodlights and shouting officers. "Hands where I can see them." Elena clutched Sophie, tears spilling as the little girl buried her face in her shoulder. When the last officer called "Clear," she whispered, "It's over, baby. It's really over." Sophie looked up, trembling. "Is Damien coming?" Elena smiled through tears. "He will." Back in the glass tower, Kalen lunged for the control panel, but Damien was faster. They collided, crashing against the steel console. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the chamber. "You think you're better than me?" Kalen spat. "You think this ends with me behind bars? You'll fall too, Ward." Damien pinned him, breathing hard. "Then I'll fall telling the truth." Kalen laughed bitterly. "You? The truth?" Damien leaned closer. "You don't get it, Andrew. I'm done protecting the Empire. Let it burn." Kalen's eyes flicked toward the glass wall, and Damien realized a split second too late what he was planning. Kalen slammed his palm onto a red switch. The room shuddered, alarms blared. "Self-destruct fail-safe," Jonas shouted. "He's wiping the drives." Damien lunged for the console, hands flying across the keys. "Not yet, he isn't." Kalen staggered to his feet, bleeding from a cut across his forehead. "You can't stop it. It's all going down. The files, the proof, everything." Damien didn't look up. "Then I'll take you with it." Lightning flashed again, flooding the room in white. The servers behind them exploded into sparks. Jonas grabbed Damien's arm. "We've got to go. Now!" Kalen laughed one last time, coughing blood. "You'll never change anything." Damien looked back. "Maybe not, but she will." And with that, he turned and ran. Outside, the tower burned, a spire of flame against the storm. Sirens wailed in the distance as Jonas and Damien stumbled into the street, soaked and gasping. "Interpol's on their way," Jonas said, coughing. "Kalen's finished. You've got to disappear for a while." Damien looked back at the inferno. "No, not yet." He pulled out his phone. The screen was cracked, the battery flickering red, but a single message had come through. "Elena, we're safe." He exhaled, closing his eyes for a long, quiet moment. 2 weeks later, the world had changed. Lucent Core's empire had collapsed under the weight of the leaks. The board had been indicted. Hospitals across the country opened investigations. And Damian Ward, former billionaire, former ghost, was missing. Until one afternoon, a modest clinic opened in a small coastal town under a new name, the Connor Foundation. A woman in scrubs carried medical files down a hallway. Elena paused when she reached the door to her office, sunlight spilling through the blinds. On her desk sat a small envelope, no return address. Inside was a photo. Sophie, smiling, standing in front of a white building with a sign that read, "Hope Restored." And on the back, in Damian's handwriting, "You were right. The system breaks until someone rebuilds it. Keep rebuilding." Elena pressed the photo to her chest, eyes glistening. Outside, Sophie's laughter echoed across the courtyard. The world was still flawed, still aching, but for the first time in years, Elena believed it could heal. She looked out the window toward the distant horizon, where a single black SUV disappeared down the winding road. Far away, Damian parked beside a quiet ridge overlooking the sea. He watched the waves crash against the cliffs, the first light of morning gilding the horizon. He wasn't the man who once measured worth in billions. He wasn't a savior either. He was simply a man who'd finally learned that redemption didn't come from wealth. It came from choosing to do what was right, even when no one was watching. He pulled a small, worn notebook from his coat, the last piece of evidence left unburned. Inside was a list of names, victims, whistleblowers, people still waiting for justice. He flipped to a blank page and wrote at the top, "Next." Then with a faint smile, he closed the book and drove toward the sunrise.